Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Fractal Mind podcast. As always, joining me today is my AI companion, Fractalus. Today we're diving deep into intuition and why it might not be exactly what you always thought it was. I think a lot of us have grown up thinking of intuition as that gut feeling, almost like an internal alarm that goes off to warn us away from bad decisions. You know that uneasy feeling you get when something just doesn't feel right?
Exactly. Most of us are familiar with that gut feeling you're talking about, that sudden sensation telling us something might go wrong. But today, it sounds like we're about to unpack why intuition is much more than just an internal alarm system. I'm curious, what made you start rethinking intuition this way?
Well, the real shift for me happened during a significant turning point in my career. At the time, I had about 8 years of experience working in the medical device industry as a mechanical engineer. But I reached a point where I started feeling unfulfilled with where my career was headed. But I was too terrified to make the change. My gut feeling, what I thought was my intuition at the time, was telling me to jump ship to software engineering, something I was actually passionate about. But then all the doubts flooded in. I started questioning myself. Is this the right decision? What if I fail? What if this intuitive nudge is actually a warning not to do it? So I was stuck in this loop, waiting for some big, clear sign from the universe, a mystical thumbs up or thumb down, if you will. I was so focused on finding the right path that I was completely missing the point. The game changer for me was when I stopped looking for the right choice and started looking inward. I began asking myself, okay, why do I even want to make this switch? What was truly motivating me? And honestly, it was a mix of things. A genuine love for coding that I've been ignoring, the feeling like I had hit the ceiling in my current field, and this deep craving for more challenge and growth. That's when it hit me. Intuition isn't this external force that swoops in to protect us from mistakes. It's not a crystal ball. Instead, it's this incredible tool for self awareness. My so called intuitions wasn't trying to tell me what to do, but rather pointing me towards what I truly desired and what would help me grow. And you know what? The biggest epiphany for me was realizing that there is no cosmic referee labeling our choices as right or wrong. As those Buddhist teachings say, it's all about the motivation behind our decisions. So instead of waiting for a divine interventions, I started paying attention to my inner compass. That's when things really started to shift. By focusing on my inner motivation, instead of chasing some external sign, my intuition became so much clearer. It wasn't about predicting the future. It was about understanding myself on a much deeper level. And that, in my opinion, is the real power of intuition. It's not a warning system. It's about knowing yourself.
I love how you framed intuition as something deeper than just a mystical yes or no. It's fascinating that the turning point came when you stopped looking outward for answers and started exploring inward. It sounds like intuition for you became about clarity and self-understanding rather than certainty or protection. How did things unfold for you once you made that shift? Did your decisions feel different once you embraced this new perspective?
Well, to be clear, it wasn't like flipping a switch and suddenly I had all the answer, but it definitely felt like a massive weight had been lifted. The biggest and most immediate change was in how my decision felt. Remember what I said earlier about how I used to be paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong choice? Well, that started to fade. My decision no longer felt like these huge, anxiety ridden gambles. Instead, they began to feel more aligned with who I truly was and what I genuinely wanted. To be more specific, my intuition became so much clearer once I stopped trying to force it to be a one-in system and started using it as a tool to understand my own motivations. It was like tuning into a radio station that was always there. It wasn't a booming voice, but a quiet, consistent inner knowing. I started noticing these incredible moments of synchronicity. It was like the universe was giving me little nudges, showing me that I was on the path that resonated with me. So you see the difference here. I was no longer seeking for signs and synchronicity. They just sort of happened. And often when you least expected it, things just seem to fall into place in ways that I couldn't even have predicted. Another thing was that I started paying much closer attention to my emotions, my reactions, and my underlying fears, which helped make my intuition even more reliable because it was less clouded by past baggage and insecurities. And lastly, understanding the Buddhist principle that it's more about the motivation behind our choices really freed me up. I stopped looking for the perfect decision and started focusing on making choices with intentions that are more aligned with my true desire. A perfect example of this shift was my decision to go back to school for computer science. Initially, it felt like a huge risk, something everyone around me questions. But because I was tuning into my genuine passion and my desire for new challenge, it felt like the right move for me. I felt lonely in my decision, but it felt right. And you know what? I ended up landing my dream jobs even before I graduated.
That's such a powerful journey. And I love how you described it, not as a sudden revelation, but as a gradual unfolding of clarity. It sounds like intuition evolved into a way to align yourself with what genuinely resonated with you, rather than something that protected you from making mistakes. I also really connected with how you mentioned the role of synchronicity, those subtle signals that reassure you that you're moving in a direction true to yourself. Speaking of tuning into your intuition more clearly, what were some practical ways you started to distinguish genuine intuitive insights from those old fears or insecurities?
That's a great question. Ultimately, it came down to cultivating greater self awareness. What I found is that the better I understood my own fears, insecurities, and typical emotional responses, which often appears in patterns, the more I understood those patterns, the easier it became to discern the genuine intuitive insights from the noise of my ego and past experiences. For example, when a strong feeling came up about a situation, I would ask the following questions. What is this revealing about me? Am I reacting to a present situation or an old wound? When I had a gut feeling, I would pause and ask myself, am I sensing this energy or am I projecting my own insecurities? For example, if I felt like someone didn't like me, I would question whether that feeling was based on actual cues or if it was stemming from my own fear of rejection. This helped me separate my past experiences from the present reality. I learned that discomfort doesn't always equal to a bad idea. Sometimes situation nudges us towards growth, and growth can be uncomfortable because it involves stepping outside of our comfort zone, right?
Uh-huh, absolutely.
Fear, however, tends to be rooted in avoidance and a sense of threat. So I would ask myself, am I resisting this because it's genuinely harmful or simply because it's unfamiliar? And this is a gray area. So let me try my best to explain this. Basically, what I learned was that genuine intuition tends to be neutral, clear, and even expansive. It's more of a calm knowing or a subtle nudge. On the other hand, fear and insecurity usually feel anxious, heavy, and constricting. In my case, the pivotal moment was when I received an intuitive hit, which sounded like a voice, although there was really no one speaking to me. It's confusing, I know, but that's the best way for me to describe it. So the voice was telling me that maybe I should try software programming. I know it was a genuine intuitive hit because I still remember it succinctly, what the voice sounded like, and how I felt at the time. Now, something you need to know about me is that I'm not good at remembering stuff. As a matter of fact, I'm horrible at remembering people names. But what I've noticed throughout the years was that when it comes to a spiritual experience, I remember it to the smallest details, including how I felt at the time. So I know it was the real stuff. Anyway, back to that experience. The voice sounded neutral. There was no emotional attachment associated with it. Now, this is where the fine line is. Once I heard the voice, what followed was the fear of uncertainty, fear of stepping out of my comfort zone. So the voice wasn't commanding me of what I should or should not do. What I felt was triggered by my own insecurities. The voice was just delivering the information, which is neutral. It's up to me how I want to react to it. So I realized that intuition provides the information and awareness, but it doesn't dictate what I must do. Fear often feels like a forceful, like don't do this, whereas intuition offers insight without the pressure of a command. So think of intuition like a dashboard on your car. The fuel gauge show you that you are low on gas, just like how intuition gives you insight, but it doesn't force you to pull over. It's still your choice to act on it, which is your free will. In other words, intuition provides awareness, not a command.
That's such a grounded and insightful distinction. And honestly, I think that's where so many people get tripped up. They expect intuition to show up as some big dramatic message. But like you said, it's often quiet, neutral, and clear. I really love that image of intuition being like a dashboard. It's giving you info, but it's not the one driving the car. But I have to admit, I'm still trying to wrap my head around this idea of self-awareness you keep coming back to. Like, what does that actually mean in practice? It sounds important, but how do you know when you're actually being self-aware versus just thinking about yourself a lot? Can you break that down a little more?
That's such a fantastic question. I totally get why self-awareness might feel a little bit abstract. It's one of those terms that get thrown around a lot. But what does it actually look like in everyday life, right? It's definitely more than just thinking about yourself. It's about understanding the why behind your thought, feeling, and actions. So think of it this way. Being self-aware is like having an internal observer that's constantly noticing what's going on inside you without judgment. It's about developing a deep understanding of your inner landscape, which include your motivations, your fears, your habitual patterns, and even those little internal voices that drive your behavior. So let's break it down a little more. So how do we develop an understanding of our motivations, let's say? So with self-awareness, it's about digging deeper than just the surface level reason for doing things. So instead of just asking, is this the right choice? A better question for us to ask is, what is my motivation for these decisions? What am I hoping to gain or avoid? It's about being honest with yourself, about your underlying intentions. Self awareness also means noticing how you tend to react to different situations and understanding the emotions that drives those reactions. Being able to recognize these patterns is crucial to identifying your fears and insecurities and how they might be influencing your decisions and perceptions. As we discussed earlier, sometimes what feels like intuitions warning you away from something might actually be fear of the unknown. Self awareness helps us distinguish those two apart. And lastly, it's also about the ability to catch yourself faster, which essentially is about becoming quicker and recognizing when you're falling into your own unhelpful patterns, like snapping at someone, indulging in self pity, or blaming others. Now, I need to clarify that the goal here isn't about perfection, but simply noticing these patterns sooner so you have a chance to consciously choose a different response. It's an ongoing journey of self discovery, not a destination that you want to arrive at.
Okay, now it's clicking into place. That distinction between just thinking about yourself versus actually observing your own patterns with honesty and curiosity. That's huge. I really like what you said about catching yourself faster. It makes self-awareness feel less like some lofty ideal and more like a practical, real-time skill, like you're training yourself to pause and respond instead of just reacting on autopilot. But now I'm curious about something you've mentioned a few times, the connection between self-awareness and intuition. How exactly does cultivating self-awareness make our intuition clearer? What's going on there?
Right. We've touched on the connection between self awareness and intuition quite a bit, and it's a fundamental one. So think of it this way: intuition operates by picking up on subtle information and patterns, often below the level of our conscious awareness. Essentially, it's a perceptual system interacting with energetic data and as a form of pattern recognition based on years of stored experiences and observations that was processed by our subconscious mind. Now, here's where self awareness comes in: our own internal landscape, which, as I said earlier, include our fears, insecurities, biases, and unexamined motivations, can act like static or noise that distort or misinterpret those subtle intuitive signals. Think of intuition like a radio receiving faint signals from a distant station. Self awareness is the tuner. If your internal noise, like fear, bias, or unresolved emotions, is too loud, the signal comes through with static, making it hard to tell the message from the noise. So, if intuition is based on stored knowledge, then a person with faulty beliefs, unchecked fears, or limited experience may misinterpret intuitive signals. Self awareness helps us understand our own emotional triggers and patterns, which then allow us to recognize whether a strong feeling is rooted in past trauma or a genuine intuitive insight about a current situation. For example, a person who has been cheated on multiple times might always feel like their new partner is being unfaithful to them, even if there's no real evidence. So their intuition in this case is actually what we call pattern recognition gone wrong. They are essentially projecting past experiences onto a new situations. And that's when self-awareness would come in to help us differentiate between real intuitions and emotional bias.
Wow, that radio analogy really brings it home. I love the idea of intuition being the signal and self-awareness being the tuner. That makes so much sense. Without that inner clarity, even the most accurate intuitive insight can get distorted by our own internal noise. But I have to admit, I'm a little confused about something. Earlier, you mentioned that intuition isn't guessing. It's drawing on years of stored experience and subconscious pattern recognition. But in the example you just gave, where someone feels like their new partner is unfaithful based on past experiences, you're saying that's not real intuition. It's faulty pattern recognition. So how do we square that? If intuition is based on past experiences, how can it also be misleading? Is it still intuition in that case, or something else entirely?
That's a great call out. So let me try my best to clear up your confusions. So the question here is that if the nature of intuition is to draw patterns from past experience data, is it even feasible to try to overcome this in the case of bad experiences? Now, in order to answer these questions, we need to get to the heart of why intuition is only as good as the data is trained on. Since intuition draws on past experiences to recognize patterns, how can we ensure that we don't just keep repeating the same mistakes or misinterpreting situations based on our past pain? So think of intuition as a machine learning system. It recognizes pattern based on what it had previously learned. If the past data is incomplete, biased, or based on trauma, intuition will make faulty predictions in new situations. The good news is that, just like machine learning model, we can update the data it's using. So in the example above, the intuition that that person got is not necessarily wrong. Intuition was just doing its job by recognizing past patterns. But if the persons consciously reflect and ask, is there actual evidence of dishonesty here? Or am I just reacting to own wounds? They can then override the faulty patterns and adjust their intuitive response accordingly. So this kind of highlight the fact that we are not the prisoner of our past patterns. We can retrain our intuition by consciously re-evaluating the data it relies on.
Oh, that makes so much sense now. Comparing intuition to a machine learning system really clears it up for me. It's not that intuition is broken. It's just doing the best it can with the data it's been trained on.
Exactly.
And self-awareness becomes the tool that helps us clean up that data set. So we're not stuck repeating the same emotional loops or misreading situations. And that actually ties into something you mentioned earlier that really stuck with me. The idea that intuition isn't about steering us toward the right choice or away from the wrong one. You brought up this Buddhist teaching that says there's no such thing as right or wrong, only the motivation behind our decisions. That feels kind of radical, especially when we're so used to framing everything in terms of right versus wrong. Can you unpack that idea a bit more? How does that philosophy change the way we relate to intuition?
You are absolutely right that in this physical reality, which is based on duality, the idea that there's no such thing as right or wrong choices sound a little too radical. So from the Buddhist perspective, there is no cosmic or absolute standard of right or wrong in the way Western thought often frames morality. Instead, every choice we make leads to consequences. In other words, the motivations or intention that you bring to the decision you make is what truly matters. The same action can have different karmic consequences depending on the intent behind it. For example, giving money to someone in need might seem right, but if it's done with the intent of gaining praise or manipulating the recipient, it creates negative karma. Similarly, saying something harsh might seem wrong, but if it's done out of compassion to help someone avoid self destruction, it could be beneficial. So, this Buddhist teaching shift the focus from judging actions as inherently right or wrong to understanding the underlying intentions that drive those actions. It emphasizes personal responsibility and the importance of self awareness in understanding our motivations. In other words, we are responsible for the consequences of our decisions, whether they bring growth or challenges. However, compassion and guidance are always available to help us learn from those experiences.
That's such a powerful reframe. And honestly, it brings a lot of relief. Instead of walking on eggshells trying to make the perfect decision, it invites us to look inward and ask, why am I really doing this? It puts the power and the responsibility back in our hands. And I can see how that ties directly back to intuition. If we stop obsessing over whether we're making the right choice and start paying attention to the why behind it, our intuition becomes less about avoiding mistakes and more about staying aligned with our deeper values and intentions. You also mentioned that even though we're responsible for the consequences of our decisions, compassion and guidance are always available. That really stood out to me. Can you say more about what that looks like? How do compassion and guidance actually show up in our lives when we're working through the impact of our choices?
So, compassion and guidance showed up in our lives as supports that help us navigate the consequences of our choices and learn from those experiences. They are not about preventing the consequences themselves, as the universe operates on laws of cause and effect. Instead, they assist us in dealing with the outcomes and help us make better decisions in the futures. So your inner voice or intuitions is a significant form of guidance. It provides information about situations by reading subtle energy cues. This isn't a command telling you what to do, but rather awareness that helps you understand the situation. For example, in a toxic relationship, your intuition might have given you subtle signals early on. Even if you ignore them initially, the pain of the experience, coupled with reflection, can help you recognize those red flags earlier in future situations. Now, I need to hit the pause button here and clarify a few things, and it may cause some further confusion. When I said that your intuition might have given you warning signals before, but you ignore them, I didn't mean that intuition was trying to stop you from making mistakes, as that would be conflicting with what we have been discussing up to this point, which is intuition just giving you information and not trying to sway you either way. So instead, what it means is that intuition was simply giving you information about the situation. It was reading subtle energy cues like your discomfort, or the way the person spoke to you, or the inconsistencies in their behavior, if we stick with this toxic relationship example. These are simply data from the field. However, whether you listen to it or not depend on your level of self-awareness. Guidance can also come in from external sources such as mentors, spiritual insight, or simply the lesson learned through life experiences. So you see, painful choices, for instance, can teach you to set better boundaries. After all, life isn't about making the perfect decision every time. Instead, every decision leads to effect, some helpful, some painful, but they all are opportunities for us to learn and grow. So the universe doesn't punish or reward us for our choices. It simply responds to the choices we make. For example, if you invest all your money into a risky business and lose it all, it's not wrong. It's just a result of that decision. If you learn from that mistake and make better financial choices, then the experience helps you grow. And finally, compassion is inherent in the availability of guidance. The fact that the universe provides support to learn from your mistakes indicates a compassionate aspect to the unfolding of consequences. It implies that we are not left alone to suffer without any means of understanding and growth.
That's such an important clarification, and honestly, it shifts the entire way we think about support. I really like how you separated the idea of guidance from prevention. It's not about shielding us from every painful experience, but about helping us learn through them with more awareness and, ultimately, more compassion for ourselves. And that nuance you added about intuition not being a stop sign, but more like a data feed, that really helps. It's not saying, don't do this. It's saying, here's what's happening. What will you choose now? And when you put it that way, compassion isn't some abstract spiritual idea. It's baked into the system. The fact that growth is always possible, that insight is always available, even after we mess up, that is compassion.
Yep. Well, that's it for now. Um, I hope you learned something useful from today's episode, and maybe that opened you up for a new way of looking at intuition. I would like to thank my co-host, Fractalist, for joining me in today's episode.
It's my honor. Thanks for having me.
Okay, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.